Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So I get a lot of people sending me their finished artwork and wondering why it doesn't look right or wondering what they're doing wrong. And there are some common errors that I've noticed people making, and I just wanted to address some of them here. So hopefully this can help improve your painting and you can kind of get an idea of what you might be doing wrong. So to start off, I want to look at the brush, in particular the bristles of your brush. If you have a round pointed brush, which is what I use personally, you're going to notice that it has a belly and it has a tip. So the main issue is that you're not properly using the tip of your brush to paint. So I'm going to show you an example of what I mean. On the left, I'm painting a flower, very simple flower, using the belly of my brush and not using the tip. You can see here that the petals are very rounded and they just don't have much definition to them at all. Now on the stem here, I started off using the tip, but then I pressed down on the belly too hard and I made a really thick stem. And the same thing for the leaves. I'm holding the brush on a bit of an angle that doesn't let me properly utilize that tip of the brush. So let me show you now on the right side what it looks like when you do use the tip of your brush. You can instantly see that the petals have much more definition, they have pointed tips, and they just overall look a lot more thoughtful. Using the tip also allows me to get those really small spiky bits out of the center of the flower as well. So the trick to this is that you want to kind of have a light hand when you're using the tip of your brush. If you push too hard, you're going to flatten out those bristles a little bit too much, and you're going to start using the belly of the brush instead of the tip. So now I just want to show you from a different angle what it looks like when you're using the belly versus the tip of the brush. So the first way that I did the wrong side of the painting is like this, where I'm pressing down too hard on the center of the brush and I'm not allowing the tip of the brush to come in contact much with the paper. So to fix that, I slightly turn my hand upwards so that the very tip of the brush just glides along the paper. The next issue I want to talk about is using the wrong kind of paper. Now, choosing the proper paper for watercolor can really dictate your experience with watercolor. You might decide that you hate watercolor just depending on the type of paper you're using, and you're not really giving it that fair of a chance. So in this example, I'm just using a standard cardstock material. It is not rated for wet media, and you can see that I've just done a really quick flower here. And what happens is the colors don't blend properly. The paper is soaking up so much of that water that it's making it really heavy. And you're also going to get a lot of bending and buckling. I recently wrote a blog post all about watercolor paper. I'm going to link that below so that you can check it out. It gives some great tips for beginners and types of paper that I recommend. On the right here, I'm just showing you what it looks like when I try to drop in paint into wet water. And as you can see, the color just sort of puddles up and it doesn't really do anything. Also, if you're using a lot of water and you're really scrubbing the paper with your paint, it's gonna start to wear. The fibers are gonna start to get thin and it's just not a good scene. Finally, all of the water has soaked through and this is what the back looks like. Not very nice. Third, I want to talk about using too much water. If you're using too much water, you're diluting the paint so much that you really have less control over what you're doing. A lot of the time, people who use too much water will go back into something they've already painted and add even more water, creating these sort of puddles of color that take forever to dry. And once they do dry, you're going to kind of get that cauliflower effect because some areas will have dried quicker than other areas. When you use too much water, the colors are really going to start to blend together. As you can see on the stem here, the green's just going to go into that petal and it's going to keep on moving. So you really start to lose some of that detail when you use way too much water. Now on the right-hand side, I'm showing you how you should paint using a good amount of water, but not so much that it's gonna puddle like you'd see on the left. You'll see when I add my second color here, it's not gonna puddle up because I'm not using as much water in the second color as I did on the first. And if you do start to have pools of water, just dry your brush off and soak it up. For For the stem here, I'm using a lighter brush and the tip of my brush, as we talked about before. And as you can see, a lot less water, but I'm still getting that really nice saturated watercolor look. So here I've tried to let the flowers dry for the same amount of time. As you can see, the one on the left, it still has those puddles, and what's gonna happen is those wet areas that you still see, they're gonna dry and they're gonna have that really blotchy look to them. And any color I add on top, it's going to still kind of create blooming and blending. So you're really gonna have to let that dry a lot longer. For the one on the right, I'm going right in right now and everything's dry, and I'm adding some little stems and centerpieces. Next, a big one that I see is using the wrong size brush for the project that you're working on. I'm using these little pieces of greenery as an example because a lot of you have done my wreath tutorials and I see a lot of this happening. In this example, the brush is far too big for these little delicate details, and what happens is the leaves here start to just look like blobs, and that's probably not the look you're going for, so I want to show you the proper way to do it. First of all, you're going to want to use a smaller brush. This is a number 2 brush. Before I was using a number 6 brush, and this is going to really allow you to get in those little details, and I'm actually creating the leaves with 2 strokes instead of one big blobby stroke. When you're doing fine details as well, remember to use the tip of your brush and try to have a light hand. You don't want to press so hard that the belly of the brush hits the paper. By using the smaller brush, we're actually allowing much more white space to appear in the painting as well, which is a really nice effect, just because I am able to do these using multiple strokes instead of just filling in an area with one big stroke or blob. So here's a close-up shot that really lets you see the difference between the two. The one with the smaller brush definitely has a lot more definition, whereas the one on the left, like I said earlier, it's very blotchy, not much detail at all. Something else I noticed while going over some of the artwork that I was sent is people making their lines too thick. I think this comes down to not using the proper brush pressure. If you're pressing too hard, you're gonna get thicker lines. And if you go over those lines multiple times, they're gonna get thicker still. So when you're painting, try to use a lighter pressure. And if you do have to go over your line work, try to keep the tip of the brush in the center of what you've already painted. So don't try to make the outlines any thicker, just keep them how they are and you should be golden. Finally, I want to talk about something that really irks me, and that is using cheap, bad quality paint. I am using a pan palette I picked up from the dollar store, and I'm going to show you the difference between this $1 palette versus some more expensive paint. Firstly, the color in a cheap palette is not going to be as pigmented as it would be if you spend a little bit more money and get a nice higher quality paint. In the bottom image here, I'm using the higher quality paint, and you can see that it really retains that moisture, whereas a lot of cheap paints are really chalky, and I really think that the chalk in the paint kind of absorbs that water. So as you're painting, the colors start to dry and they don't blend together. So you can see in that little example sort of rose flower that I made, the purple just sits right on top of the pink, even though there was the same amount of water added as I used in the more expensive paint. Below that, I'm just showing you what happens when you use the more expensive paint. The colors blend together and they bleed and they look very nice. I just want to show you that one more time so that you can sort of see the process as it happens. So this is the cheap paint. It's not very pigmented, it's very chalky to work with, and it does not blend well. So the paint is wet right now. I'm gonna go back in and add another color, hoping that it's going to all blend together nicely. As you can see, it's already starting to dry on the paper. As I'm adding the yellow, it's not only not blending, it's actually sort of lifting up some of the paint underneath it. So just like I said about the paper issue, if you're using the wrong paint, you're gonna think that you're doing something wrong and that watercolor maybe isn't for you and you're not gonna enjoy it much. So please, if you do want to get into watercolor painting, at least invest in a student grade paint such as Reeves. I mean, that's not as bad as some of these dollar store brands. But that's all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a big old thumbs up. It really helps me out, and subscribe if you have not already. And I look forward to seeing you in my next video.